I think Banegas Arroyo, when Posada came to Mexico City, was using wood engravings and metal engravings, things done by hand. I think what Posada brought him was a much fuller, quicker, cheaper supply through this modern technology. I think that it's difficult to use, you need skills, and I think probably people around Posada did work on the images by hand, but I think he designed them on paper and transferred them to zinc, and then they were worked on. So I think, as in Europe, photomechanical process included skilled handwork. So I think the absolute distinction is no more true in Europe or in the United States than it is in Mexico, but I'm sure that Posada worked that way. I think he's the most wonderful draftsman. His pages look gorgeous. I think that moment at the end of the 19th century, when paper starts to be made from trees, so it becomes free, and when images start to be made photomechanically, so that they no longer take skilled human labor to produce, all that changes the relationship between good pictures as the possession of the rich and bad pictures as the possession of the poor. Posada is living in the moment when that changes. So you have to reinvent cultural difference, and Posada collaborates on the reinvention of a modern cultural difference. He develops an aesthetics of exclusion, and I think that dynamic, the relationship between the aesthetics of exclusion and the aesthetics of the elite, has to be reinvented in that generation. And Posada is one of the most productive, influential, good reimaginers of him and Banegas Arroyo, because they're in it together. People have always noticed them and thought, this is really interesting. They've framed their interest differently. They've framed it in terms of the struggle of the Mexican people for independence, or they've framed it in terms of desacralization. But, and his work supports both those stories. But I see it primarily in terms of a media history and the intervention of a really skilled artist and a great cultural entrepreneur, and I think Posada's the artist and Banegas Arroyo is the cultural entrepreneur, to produce things that go on talking to people. I think the calaveras are particularly interesting. Posada lives on, but the pictures live on more. The same as in 1900. He was making the pictures, but the pictures have an independent life in the layouts that Banegas Arroyo do. So his relationship to his work was then distant, and his ownership of the idea of the calavera is now distant. Well, anybody who's an art historian thinks that artists produce representations that people recognize. So I think Posada and Banegas Arroyo produce an imagery that people recognize. So I don't think the images are already there before they're made by the artist, but I think that they're successful